So thanks for being here. We will open this webinar up to questions when we are done. You'll be able to raise your hand if you do have any questions. If not, or if you want to get a copy of this webinar when we are done, just let us know. We can distribute this webinar here in the coming weeks. Our next webinar is going to be on May 2nd at 1 p.m. It's going to be a little bit different format. We're going to have a national guest speaker. The topic is role reversal, how to take care of yourself and aging parents. So that's going to be done by Iris Wagler, who is a national expert in that area. So again, that's May 2nd at 1 p.m. So in light of our retirement discussion today, I always like to start with a little comedy to get us ready to go. And I recall my grandma, she was always very proud of the fact that she was 103 years old. She made it to 103. And I said, Grandma, what's the best thing about being 103 years old? And she says, well, Johnny, that's what she called me, there's no peer pressure. that makes sense.
I suppose at that age, that would make sense.
Yeah. Oh, what were some other good ones she liked to say? She always said, you're over the hill when your back goes out more than you do. And then one of my clients sent me this a while back. Perks of being over 60 years old. In a hostage situation, you're likely to be released first. No one expects you to run anywhere. People call at 9 p.m. and ask, did I wake you? There's nothing left to learn the hard way. Like that one. Things you buy now won't wear out, or if they do, you won't care. You enjoy hearing about other people's operations. You get into heated arguments about pension plans. You no longer think of speed limits as a challenge. You quit trying to hold your stomach in no matter who walks into the room. And last one, you sing along with Elevate. So I can hear you all laughing. And with that, we are going to get started with our presentation today. If you want in this Zoom format, you can move around the picture on the Zoom if it's or if your picture or our pictures are in the way of the slides. You can either minimize our pictures or move those around. So feel free to play around with your screen that way. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kevin as I pull up this webinar.
Awesome. Appreciate that, John. One other one to add to your list would be once you get into your older ages, you get the senior discount. That's kind of a fun one too. So
let's see if I can get this shared here. Hold on one second.
Yeah, we're definitely excited to talk about this topic today, and John's got that pulled up. Looks great there. I don't know if you want to throw the disclosure slide on real quick. There we go. Make sure compliance stays happy, and you guys can all quickly read through that. All right, so just wanted to welcome everyone here today. Thank you for joining us for our presentation, and our topic is life after work. It's certainly our pleasure to share with you some insights and information surrounding retirement income planning. And as I mentioned before, it's certainly a topic that John and I are very passionate about. If you're on the call today, it could very likely mean you're near retirement, thinking ahead to retirement, wondering how you're going to replace the income that you'll need to meet your expenses after the paychecks stop coming in. It's kind of a different thought to think about it that way. But now you spent years saving and scrimping, and you probably have accumulated some good-sized piggy banks or multiple piggy banks at that. Yet you're still maybe worrying about your savings and investments if they're going to be enough to support you through your golden years. So over the next 45 minutes or so, let's take some time to talk about how to manage your piggy banks to generate the retirement income that you'll need. We'll walk you through some of the basic guidelines to building a retirement income plan. Now, this presentation is titled Life After Work because retirement income planning really is all about creating a good life for yourself after you leave your primary job. It doesn't mean you won't necessarily work. In fact, a lot of baby boomers are planning to continue working in some capacity after they leave their main job. But hopefully the work you do in retirement won't really feel like work. I mean, work is a thing you're getting away from. Life is what you're moving towards. Now, like everything else you buy or invest in, you need to figure out how to fund your life after work. You really need a budget and a plan. So for many of us, we are talking 30 years here where you're really responsible for your own paycheck, making it really essential that you have a solid retirement income plan. So if ever there was a time to plan, retirement it's it, because once you leave your career and start depending on multiple sources of income in retirement, you want to make sure that the income lasts. The reality is no one wants to go back to work at age 80 because they didn't plan well enough, which should be motivation in itself to prioritize proper planning. Let me just grab a drink of water here, 1 second. All right, sorry about that. Now, retirement income plan helps you determine how much income you'll need, where that income will come from, when you'll start Social Security, and whether or not you will work, and how to manage withdrawals from retirement and investment accounts in order to really have a sustainable lifestyle throughout retirement. Now, above all, we want to be sure that your income outlasts your last breath of air. So we need a plan to manage your retirement savings over a 30-year time period, realizing that more and more people are now living until past age 100. So making sure you have enough money is really critical. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but in the store, there's now a pretty good sized section for 100-year-old birthday cards, which is, really telling if you ask me. So in this 2023 Retirement Confidence Survey, you can see what pre-retirees expect in terms of major and minor income sources compared to actual income sources in retirement. These income sources include Social Security, employment earnings, investments, and pension plans. So for example, the second income source shown, it's workplace retirement savings, and they're expected to be a major source of income for 84% of workers who haven't reached retirement yet, but only a major source of income for 49% of folks who are actually retired. So retirement plans tend to play a smaller role in retirement income, a little bit smaller role than many people will think that they would while they're working. But even so, one of the most basic recommendations is to be sure you're funding your 401k through work or any other retirement plan that's available to you. Sometimes expectations don't match the reality of your finances post-retirement. So it's crucial to create and follow a detailed retirement strategy that leaves little up to chance. Many times this is done with the help of a financial advisor who has the resources, the knowledge, the technology to really analyze your current financial situation and then create what we call in our group a financial roadmap, which helps model your cash flow throughout retirement. The guidance provided by your financial advisor is critical in helping you stay on track towards meeting your long-term financial goals. So now, despite the fact that most people will need to rely on retirement accounts, on retirement accounts for retirement, just over 1/4 of Americans do not have any retirement savings. So for any of you who may be in this boat, we strongly urge you to start saving for retirement as soon as possible. And for those who are already saving for retirement, we would certainly urge you to consider increasing your contribution levels and or to start maxing out. Trust us, if you take our advice, you'll thank us later. And what about a regular or Roth IRAs? Keeping in mind, most people in this country do not own an IRA, which is really an essential planning tool for retirement. Do you think your retirement savings are on track? Less than half of those aged 60 plus perceive their retirement savings as being on track. And for those aged 45 to 59, it's only 34% that think they're on track. Also, only 36% of American households have $250,000 or more saved for retirement. And in many cases, that's just not going to be enough. So given all those stats and you feeling more or maybe less prepared for retirement, what do you think? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today, to make you feel more prepared and to show you what you need to do to get ready for retirement. And one of the first things to do that will guide you most of your decisions is to imagine your life in retirement. Just take a step back for a moment, visualize how you want to live in retirement, how things will be different after you leave your current job. How do you want your life to be? Where are you going to live? What will you do? How will you spend your time? How long do you think you will live? What surprises do you think the future will hold in retirement? How much income will you need? All those questions are important. So for some pre-retirees, the first consideration is where they'll live. Now, not everyone changes their residence in retirement, but certainly a lot of people do. If you're not tied to a job, you can be free to live anywhere. Perhaps you'll live closer to your children or grandchildren, or maybe you'll move to a state like Florida to avoid the state income tax. Or maybe you'd like to downsize to make your housing more affordable, because that's certainly a key consideration. Now, if you plan to work or run a business, you'll want to think about areas with the right employment or business opportunities. If you plan to do a lot of travel, well then heck, you might as well live by the airport. And then there are the usual general preferences such as climate, culture, and recreational opportunities to think about. Where you end up living will have an impact on your retirement budget. So this is one of the first questions you'll want to consider. So as you can see up on the slide here, we've included some information from a recent poll from the Trans-America Center for Retirement Studies. It was released back in just last year in 2023, and it talks about how people choose where they live. Sometimes looking at what other people are doing can help you make a decision, with the top 3 items or considerations showing being, which makes sense, being nearby to family and friends, number 1. Number 2, how affordable is the cost of living? And then number 3 is, are you in close proximity to excellent healthcare? So just those are the top 3 that show on the chart there. And then as a pre-retiree, are you considering downsizing? Most Americans' net worth is tied up in home equity. So this home equity is generally non-income producing, and it's also illiquid. Now, you can unlock some of the home equity with financial instruments such as things like reverse mortgages, but they can also sort of hamstring your flexibility later in life. So there's pros and cons. Making the decision to downsize or even to potentially rent, it may allow you to unlock a substantial portion of your net worth to help support your standard of living in retirement. So consider how much of your savings are tied up in the house and the resulting things like maintenance, taxes, insurance, and all those other expenses that come with the house. If you continue to own, you should consider sort of right-sizing your home, which could mean possibly downsizing that 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home that you maybe currently live in to a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home that may be a little bit more appropriate and certainly less costly to maintain, and a little bit easier in your cash flow and future financial expenses and so forth. Or maybe you need a bigger house. I don't know. We don't know. But you and your spouse or your family need to think through some of these issues and determine really what you'll need in retirement. So definitely things you want to think about. Now, if you're not working anymore, how will you fill your time? From a financial perspective, daily activities fall into really one of 2 categories. Either have income-generating activities or expense-generating activities. If you work or run a profitable business, you'll be generating income from your daily activities. On the other hand, if you are not working, you'll need to fill your time doing something. So unless you plan to take walks all day and read library books, you may end up spending money on things like travel, hobbies, entertainment, those types of things. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but you'll just have to factor those expenses into your budget. And of course, if you plan to start a new business, don't forget that it may not be profitable at first. So count your business startup activities as really expense-generating activities until the point at which it becomes profitable, and also be sure to factor those expenses into your budget. Now, people can spend almost as much money in retirement as when they worked. I mean, the industry rule of thumb is to expect to spend about 70% as much per year in retirement as you did while working. And the free time you have, the more you can expect to spend, depending on if you want to travel, vacations and long weekends can get costly. Are you going to play more golf if you're into that? Spend time on the boat, model airplanes. I mean, it's certainly always a good idea to run a customized analysis of your cash flow, to look at your monthly expenses and then your future plans to see what needs to go into your retirement plan, because of all these variables. So how long will you live? Shoot, if we knew the answer to that question, retirement planning would be very, very easy. Because your life expectancy will determine how long your money needs to last, unfortunately, we have to plan for the worst case scenario, which means just assuming you live to age 95 or 100 or possibly beyond. The average life expectancy in the U.S. is age 79.1, but for a female, if you have made it to the age of 65, there is a 53% chance you will live to 85, and a 32% chance you will live to age 90. And then for couples, there's a 72% chance one of the spouses will live to age 85, and a 45% chance one of the spouses will live to age 90. So of course, if we die before then, it means we could have lived it up a little bit more. But again, the bigger question is, what if we don't? So having some life left at the end of your money means your retirement plan failed, but you won't know that until it's too late. So don't delay on the average life expectancy, or so don't rely on the average life expectancy for your retirement income needs when you're planned because of that. So be safe and assume you live to be 100. Now, unexpected events can derail best laid plans for a successful retirement. Of course, if you knew what surprises life held in store for you, they obviously won't be surprises. But part of retirement income planning is taking a look at your life and the world around you and considering the unexpected. Health is a big issue for retirees. If you have Medicare and a supplemental policy, many of your health care expenses will be covered, except for things like premiums and some co-payments, of course. Now, the biggest concern is long-term care. Ironically, it's actually the healthiest people who are the most likely to need long-term care. If you live so long that your natural aging prohibits you from performing activities of daily living, you'll need some kind of nursing care in your old age. Now, this is staggering. According to recent studies by Fidelity Investments, a retiring couple can expect that through the course of their retirement, they will incur expenses of $315,000 for healthcare. And certainly that's a big number. So surprises can also come from family members, whether it's caring for aging parents or taking boomerang children back into the house. You may need to be prepared for unexpected expenditures of time and or money. Plus, the economy always seems to be full of surprises. Stock market fluctuations could cause your investment portfolio to decline in value, and there's truth to the theory that market declines can hurt more than gains help, especially when you're withdrawing from your portfolio. So in addition, higher interest rates can potentially decrease the value of your bonds, and there's always inflation that's a big threat to retirees, as we've seen firsthand over the last couple of years. We know that some economic forces cannot be predicted in advance, so that's why you have to be ready for anything. And when we talk about anything, we're talking about floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, forest fires, anything. So as part of that, you need to make sure that your property and casualty insurance is paid up and that your disaster kit is in place. Now, how much income will you need in retirement? Do you want sort of the lazy answer or the right answer? So the lazy answer is about 70 to 80% of your current living expenses. This assumes you will no longer be funding your retirement plans and will save on expenses associated with working, such as things like transportation and meals out. However, consider how you will spend all that free time, and it will probably cost you money that you weren't spending while working. So the more accurate way to estimate your income needs is to set up a budget as if you are already retired. So this is where the answers to those questions come into play. If you know where you'll be living and whether or not your mortgage will be paid off, for instance, you can more accurately estimate your housing costs in retirement. So you do this for every category using today's dollars. Now, once you have an idea how much you'll spend in retirement years, especially your expenses in those initial years, it's time to figure out how we're going to pay for it all. It's time to start arranging all those sort of piggy banks you've accumulated in an effort to pay for retirement. So one important piggy bank or income source for many people is Social Security. So if you and your spouse are eligible for Social Security, you need to consider how to claim Social Security to really help maximize your expected benefits. Another piggy bank is pensions. If you have one, you may need to make some elections like whether or not there will be a spousal or survivor benefits for your heirs in the event of your passing, for instance. And if you have an annuity contract, perhaps it has a living benefit guarantee that may be able to provide income or guaranteed withdrawals for life. Perhaps you'll work part-time in retirement. Do you own any investment property or have interest in a business that will continue to generate income after retirement? I mean, these are all good questions. So now what's so different about retirement compared to working full-time in your primary occupation is really that you have to manage all these income sources, which causes complexity. No longer can you just count on a direct deposit of a paycheck, hopefully that it's high enough to meet all your income needs. Those days will be over in retirement. So each of these income sources has different characteristics, and it's really important to keep these characteristics in mind when you're arranging all of your sort of, again, retirement piggy banks. So Social Security keeps up with inflation, is guaranteed for life. So once it starts, you don't have to think about it very much. But depending when to start it is a major decision for pre-retirees. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. If you're one of the few lucky people still enlisted or entitled to a pension, that income will also be guaranteed for life. But pensions generally are not adjusted for inflation. So as your expenses go up, you'll have to sort of fill in that difference from somewhere else. So maybe you plan to work during retirement. Depending on what kind of work you'll be doing, or if you own your own business, your income will either be fixed or variable. So do keep in mind that this income will not last forever. So at some point, you'll want to stop working for good. So you might want to stash some of those earnings into a savings for when that day eventually comes. And then there's investment income. So again, this includes the withdrawals you take from investment accounts, which include retirement accounts, savings accounts, rental properties, or any other assets that you own. This is the trickiest part of retirement income planning. The income may be fixed, may be variable, it's often taxed, and you must actively manage it to make sure it lasts throughout your lifetime. All right, and looking at retirement income, most people like to start with Social Security because it's a predefined amount of income. So once you turn 62, your Social Security benefit is calculated based on your earnings history. Before you turn 62, the Social Security Administration estimates your benefit assuming your present earnings will continue. So to find out your benefit estimate, you can refer to your latest annual statement from the Social Security Administration, or you always have the option to go online to their retirement estimator, and then that taps into the Social Security Administration's earnings database to help estimate your benefits based on your past earnings. So due to the importance of Social Security as a retirement income source, it's really important to work with a financial advisor to thoroughly review Social Security election options. Another common source of income in retirement is a pension. The big question here is whether or not you'll get one. Most employers really have abandoned their company-sponsored pension plans because they were just so costly. But if you happen to be one of the lucky ones, you have some homework to do. If you do have them, you're definitely in a good situation. Find out when you're entitled to your pension. That's the question you want to find out. How much will it be? What will your distribution options look like? Now, sometimes it's better to take it as an annuity. Other times it's better to take it as a lump sum and then roll that into an IRA so you can manage the investments. Certainly, if you need help analyzing your pension distribution options, we can help with that. Now, by the way, you're not counting 401k plans as pensions. So strictly speaking, pensions generate monthly income for life, and the company normally assumes the longevity risk, unless you opt for a lump sum. 401k plans are more like investment accounts because you're putting your own money into them, and then you're responsible for choosing the investments and then managing the withdrawals when that time comes. So, there's a discrepancy there, or a difference. If you have access to a pension from your employer or former employer, you should consult with a financial advisor before making any elections. So you'll often have options such as lump sum payment. Sometimes we see single life annuities, joint life annuities, a partial survivor benefit, or even things like they're called period certain options. So your selection is generally irrevocable and made. So again, the irrevocable part means it's very important to really review all your options. For example, while selecting a single life annuity, while that option may provide the highest benefit, it will not provide income to your spouse or your beneficiaries when you die. So the rules are tricky, so be sure to review the fine print or discuss your options with a professional. All right, how about work? More and more people are planning to work during retirement. I suppose you could then question the word retirement for this time of life, but often the work takes on a little bit different form in retirement. If you plan to keep working at your present job, you aren't really retiring. You're just sort of delaying retirement, and that is a very good decision for many people. So a few more years of work now will add to your financial security. It'll boost your savings, and also it'll shorten your drawdown period. So, keep at it if your work isn't really too terrible, especially if it, brings in a good paycheck. So that can be very beneficial to keep working a little bit longer. Once you leave your main job, there are several work options available to you. Some retirees become consultants. They convert their former employers into clients, and they work according to their own schedules. Others launch whole new careers of a business, and then they throw themselves into the work even more than they did before. Still others start slowing down, working a little less in their primary occupation or finding an easy job with little stress. It's always better if work decisions can be made without regard to finances. After all, this is your chance to switch careers and do something you really enjoy. But after looking at your piggy bank, you may find that there's not enough income from other sources. So this means you may be basing your work decisions on how much income it will generate. And remember we mentioned earlier, you probably won't want to work all the way to the end of your life. At some point, you'll want to stop. Maybe you'll want to work fewer years at a higher income, even though it's work you don't enjoy very much. Or if you find work you really like that happens to not pay very much, and if it isn't too physically demanding, you'll be able to continue it for many years. So these are all the things to think about when putting together a retirement income plan. Another potential source of income in retirement is an annuity. An annuity is similar to a pension in that it can provide guaranteed income. However, it is funded through your own personal investment and not by your employer. Do you have any existing annuity, or have you been considering an annuity as a potential investment for income replacement? I mean, an existing annuity may have living benefit riders or an annuitization option, which may be able to provide a guaranteed income stream or withdrawal benefit for the rest of your life. Annuities are generally a little more complicated. They can be expensive, and there are often penalties or withdrawal charges associated with the contracts. While they offer tax deferral, withdrawals are often taxed at ordinary income tax rates. If you are considering an annuity as part of your retirement plan, look closely at the prospectus and work with an advisor, really to explore all of your options and the potential costs of each. Through our lives, we acquire a lot of different accounts that we have been contributing money to over the years. Some of these accounts are retirement accounts like IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks. Some are non-retirement accounts like your checking, savings, CDs. But really, all of these accounts are important because they represent your savings that will eventually fund your retirement. And finally, we have a small percentage of retirees who earn income from other sources, such as investments in an income-producing property, or maybe an interest in a business that will continue making income after you retire. And often this type of income is variable, but needs to be considered along with your other income sources. Now, once you've identified all the sources of income, you can tap into your retirement. You have a very challenging question in front of you. To help address this question, I'm going to now turn the presentation over to my colleague, John. So take it away, John.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
You bet.
Yeah, so looking at how you put all of those different income sources together is a challenge, right? There's a lot of different ways to withdraw money, and you think about all these years that you've been in accumulation mode. It's a totally different frame of thought when you go and jump that fence over into a distribution mode. And if you think about how we see a lot of people manage their retirement, they try and do it through their risk level. And what I mean by that is they would say, okay, I'm in retirement, or I'm close to retirement, I should be more conservative. And while that is an important theory to consider in terms of your risk level, the way you manage uncertainty in retirement is different than the way you manage risk in your accumulation needs. So when I say uncertainty, what do I mean? You don't know how long you're going to live, right? Nobody knows how long the retirement is going to last. We don't know what inflation is going to be. We don't know what the rate or term, what's going to happen in the markets. Is it going to be a good market environment or bad market environment? And really, from a retirement standpoint, that first 10 years, the market environment, the first 10 years is extremely important to what's going to happen over a 30 or 40-year retirement distribution strategy. Are there going to be any extreme events that happen during your retirement, like 2020 when we all had to deal with COVID? So that's not an investment question. That's not a risk question. It's a strategy question. So when you look at some of the different strategies that are out there, I mean, these are ones that maybe you've read about or heard about. The first one there, living off the interest, that was much more popular a while back. 4% rule. We'll talk about each of these as I continue on the slide. The 4% rule was created in the 1990s. Bucket strategy is a way to segment your different investment accounts, and then mandatory versus discretionary expenses is kind of an annuity strategy. So to touch on some of those here, living off of the interest, It's basically where you put together a portfolio that throws off a lot of income. So when you think about rate of returns, there's two types of rate of returns in an investment account. You have interest and dividends. That's basically what is considered income. And then you have capital appreciation. So interest and dividends is like in a bond pays interest. That's cash flow. That's money that the bond is creating. So that's income number one. Income number two is dividends. If you own a stock like Coca-Cola, it's going to pay you a dividend every single year just for owning the stock. Basically, Coke saying, hey, thanks for being a shareholder. Here's your money. So that's the income side of return. The appreciation side of return is when you buy an investment at $10 a share, you want it to go up to $20 a share. You want it to appreciate. But that's not throwing off income. That's just appreciating. And the only way that you get to realize that appreciation is if you sell the investment itself. So living off of interest is basically where you're just taking that first bucket of return, interest and dividends, and saying, I want a majority, if not all of my investments to be income oriented. And then I'm just going to spend whatever that income is every. What that does then is your principal, the amount of money that is producing that income, is untouched. You never touch it. So technically you can never run out. So again, this was much more popular many years ago. The reason why this is a tough one in theory is, what about a low interest rate environment? The interest and dividends that a portfolio can throw out can be completely different in any given year, depending on what interest rate environment economically we're in. What if you don't want to leave that much principal to your kids? Touching principal isn't in and of itself a bad thing. But you just have to look at your estate planning goals and what you want to pass on. And another thing to consider when you're thinking of living off interest is how many people want to deal with differing income every year. Usually, when you think of your paycheck, you think of consistency. You think of this amount is coming in every month. I know what it's going to be. I know how I can live. Living off of interest isn't like that on a year-to-year basis because the amount of money you're getting is. So while this is one strategy, it's not one that is used a lot. So the 4% rule, this was a study that was done in the 1990s, and they basically looked at every 30-year period of investing history. And they said, what percentage could we withdraw from an investment portfolio and have it increase with inflation every single year? And basically the study came to a conclusion that you can take out 4% of your investment portfolio every year and increase it with inflation. So for instance, if you have $1 million saved up in retirement, you could withdraw $40,000 a year. And then next year you could withdraw 40,000 plus an additional 3 or 4% for inflation. And on and on and on and on. So that's one that I probably hear more our clients talk about is, oh yeah, I heard I can withdraw 4 or 5%. The problem with this rule is, again, it's not really reality. And from a reality standpoint, a lot of people don't need the exact same amount of income every single year for the rest of their life because income flow changes. So one major way it changes is you've got Social Security. When you take Social Security, Kevin was talking about that earlier, you can take it as early as 62, you can delay as late as 70. If you're delaying Social Security, you know you're going to have that income stream coming in later, and maybe you need more of your investments earlier, but less later because of that Social Security. So that blows that 4% rule out of the water because you don't need the same amount of money forever. The other thing is, what is your investment mix? What type of portfolio do you have? What type of volatility are you comfortable with? This 4% rule was calculated based on a 50-50 portfolio, 50% in stocks and 50% in bonds. Not every retiree we work with has that portfolio. It's a common one to be moderate, but doesn't mean it suits every individual. So if you're not 50-50, that rule doesn't apply at all. And the other thing is the 4% rule or something equivalent can leave way too much money on the table 30 years from now. And again, the question is, do you have a goal to leave a big estate? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you're just blindly taking out 4% a year, the amount of money you end up with could be much bigger than really you wanted. And someone just, I saw the other day, they said, John, I want my last paycheck to bounce. And that's interesting in theory. There's reasons that doesn't work because you don't know when that last paycheck you're going to need it. But if you think about that 4% rule, it's just, again, it's not necessarily reality on the way people tend to live in retirement as we have our conversations with clients. So you've got the bucket strategy. Bucket strategy is where you are placing your investments in different buckets. You can see they're on the right, 0 to 5 year bucket, 5 to 10 year bucket, 10 year plus bucket. And ultimately, you are setting your investment risk or your investment allocation based on that time frame. So for instance, the 0 to 5 year bucket, you take all the expenses you'll need the next 5 years, and that's your number. So let's say you needed $100,000 a year. Okay, 100,000 times 5 is 500,000. That's bucket number 1. And in bucket number 1, you invest that very conservatively because you don't have time. It's only 5 years. You don't want a lot of volatility. It's only 5 years. And you can put your head on the pillow at night feeling more comfortable in the sense that you know that's stable. You know it's not going to have a lot of volatility, and you know it's going to cover 5 years worth of your expenses. And then you look at the next bucket, the 5 to 10 year expenses bucket. That's invested a little bit more aggressively, but not as aggressively as the 10 plus bucket because 10 years isn't a huge amount of time, 5 to 10 years. So the 10 plus bucket is invested more aggressively because you don't need that money for 10 plus years. And in theory, you're more comfortable with volatility in your 10 plus year bucket because you just don't know, you don't need it. And over time, the market should do well over that time frame. And then as that 0 to 5 year bucket gets distributed, gets tipped out, you take some of the money from the other buckets strategically to refill it. But you don't do that blindly every year. Like in a bad year like 2022, you wouldn't fill that 0 to 5 year bucket again. You would just let it go because the market went down and investments went down, pretty much everything. You would let that market come back after a year or two. And then when things are back to normal, then you start refilling the first bucket. So that's more of a strategic decision over time that you make with your advisor. But looking at the overall bucketing approach, some people like that because it segments things for them. They feel better about things because they just know their short-term money is safe and their long-term money they don't care as much about, so they're willing to be more growth-oriented with it. Then you've got mandatory versus discretionary expenses. So everybody has a budget. Some people know what it is, some people don't. That budget is made up of a lot of different types of expense categories. The expense categories are either going to be broken down into mandatory expenses or discretionary expenses. So for instance, what is a mandatory expense? Things you need, things you can't live without. Food, shelter, clothing, the major part of your budget adds up to something. We call that mandatory expenses. And then the discretionary expenses, things like travel, things like entertainment, things that are nice to have, but you wouldn't necessarily need it. That's considered in the discretionary expense area. And then ultimately what you do for the mandatory bucket, that your mandatory expenses you have every year, is you cover them with a guaranteed income source that you know is going to be there. Doesn't matter what the investments are going to do, doesn't matter markets. It's just a guaranteed income source, comes in no matter what. So what are guaranteed income sources? Kevin mentioned Social Security. That is a guaranteed income source. It's an annuity. Pensions, that is a guaranteed income source. It's an annuity. And if either of those two guaranteed sources aren't enough, you can set up your own guaranteed income source in what's called an immediate annuity, where you take any portion of your investments, you turn over that portion to an insurance company, and then the insurance company says, all right, we're going to guarantee you a certain amount of money every single year the rest of your life. Sometimes Social Security and your pensions cover all of your mandatory expenses, in which case you really don't then have to worry about it. But some people like that style of withdrawal pattern. And then the discretionary expenses are just funded by a traditional investment portfolio that has growth potential and can go up with inflation. So there's pros and cons to all of those different types of approaches. Kind of talked about some of those along the way, but ultimately we want to help our clients and our future clients figure out what's best for you. What's the type of income plan that you're comfortable with? There's pros and cons to all of it. You have to know how long you're going to live. You have to know what the rate of return is going to be. You have to know what inflation is going to be able to pick the right one, and nobody knows that. I mean, a lot of people, for instance, media included, really talk poorly about annuities. And again, if you go back to my 103-year-old grandma who wanted an annuity when she was 60 years old, she was talked out of it by her advisor at the time. Because she said, that's a waste of money. That decision cost her a tremendous amount of money. Now, the advisor wasn't around to realize it, but it's the advisor had this misconception about what he or she thought was good, and it was wrong. I don't think the advisor had any ill intent, but you can't go into it thinking this is the right way, this is the way it's got to be. It's based on what's important to you. And we have a questionnaire, a retirement income questionnaire that we can take you through, our clients through, to help determine, based on how you answer those questions, what's maybe the right strategy for you. Whether it's just investing for a total return approach, or an annuity, or a bucketing strategy, or it's called a risk wrap strategy. We won't go into all that right now, but that's just a resource that we can make available to you. So please let us know if that is something you want to discuss. Taxes. Oh, you have to love taxes. So that's the biggest expense in retirement, is the taxes you pay on all this income to the good old IRS. And you see how I wrote down the IRS there on the third bullet point? Put those two words together. What does it spell? Bears. Just let that sink in for a minute. Yeah, taxes. So how is retirement income taxed? I mean, ultimately, in your accumulation years, you go from a 2-tax system, and in your retirement years, you go to a 4-tax system. So in accumulation years, you got ordinary income tax, and you got capital gains tax, which you pay in non-retirement accounts. In your retirement years, you still have income taxes, you still have capital gains taxes in your non-retirement accounts. You also now have provisional income or Social Security taxation, and you have IRMA taxation. IRMA is basically spells out the amount that every individual is paying for Medicare. A lot of people don't know that Medicare costs are based on the amount of income you have from 2 years ago. So the IRS this year for 2024 is looking at retirees' 2022 tax return, and that is telling them how much they have to charge that individual for Medicare. So that's called IRMA. But those are all the things that we take in mind as we're setting up an income plan, because it affects how much after expense income you get, which is at the end of the day what we care about. Social Security, up to 85% of the benefits are taxable, depending on how much money you're making. And some of my clients think they're in it, that they're paying 85% tax on Social Security, and that's not true. What that 85% means is if you have $1,000 in Social Security, $850 of that is taxed at ordinary income tax. And that amount, that 85%, varies depending on how much money you're bringing in. So for instance, if you're bringing in, and I'm just going to assume a married couple, you're bringing in over 44,000 of income, you've got 85% taxable for Social Security. If you're bringing in between 32 and 44,000, up to 50% is taxable. And if you're bringing in under 32,000, they don't tax Social Security at all. Pensions, if you do have a pension, all or part of that is typically ordinary income tax. Now, some pensions have some after-tax components to it, but it's very rare. So for the most part, pensions are taxed at ordinary income. If you do have any part-time income, that's also taxed at ordinary income rates. Investment income, so like from a taxable or non-retirement account, there you pay tax only on the amount of money you've made. So in a non-retirement account, the money you put in is tax-free. You won't pay tax on that ever again. That's called cost basis. The amount that you make on that money, you will have taxes on. In an IRA or other tax deferred account, taxes are paid only when you withdraw. And that is why they have required minimum distributions in IRAs and 401ks and 403bs and 457s, because the government wants their tax dollars and they're going to get them. And required minimum distributions start as today's rules at age 73. Eventually that's going to phase into age 75. That's a huge planning issue, simply because we know tax brackets are changing. In the year 2026, all tax brackets go up. So that is what's written in law today. Politically, could it change? Absolutely. But we're pretty confident it's not going to go lower than what it is today. So some people are deciding to do Roth conversions and pay the tax now and just get it out of the way at these tax brackets, so they don't have to worry about higher tax brackets in the future when it's forced out. Get a whole another conversation that we would go through with each individual and their income plan. Annuities, you can have non-retirement account annuities. You can have retirement account annuities, and that varies the taxation and how an annuity would be taxed. And then other assets, things like real estate or interest, we would have to talk about offline the different other types of accounts out there. But I want to just cover the main ones there. So tax reduction strategies, I mentioned a second ago, start drawing your IRAs before you get to required minimum distribution age, because taxes might be higher then. Because they force out a certain amount of money every single year, and that gets higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, more and more that you have to take out as you get older. And as you get older, you tend not to spend as much. You got your go-go years of retirement, shifting into your slow-go years of retirement, shifting into the no-go years of retirement. All the while, required minimum distributions are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So our goal from a taxation standpoint is always to pay the least amount of tax in aggregate for retirement periods. So over like a 30-year period, we want you to pay the least amount of tax. That differs from typical accountant's goal, where they're trying to make you pay the least amount of tax this year. But We just look at where the train is going. And eventually train's going to leave the station and requirement of distributions are going to happen and you have no choice. So we want to think about that total plan versus any given year. Sometimes it makes sense to pay more tax now so you don't have to pay it in the future. So that conversion, Roth conversion, converting IRAs to Roths, it's an every year conversation. Delay Social Security. Most of our country takes Social Security at 62 because they have no choice. They have no other money. But if you do have funds, it might make sense to delay that Social Security, get that guaranteed 7 to 8% growth rate, take out more of your money now so it's not taxed heavily in the future, because Social Security is a tax efficient income stream. Why? Because not all of it's taxed like everything else. Plus, it grows every year with the cost of living adjustment. So the fact that it's tax efficient, the fact that it grows every year, you want that pot of money to be as big as possible. So that's where the trend is: delay Social Security at least until your full retirement age. And then some people hedge their bets because, well, I don't know how long I'm going to live, or maybe reduce life expectancy in the family. It's all part of our Social Security analysis that we can provide you, give you break-even ages, have the discussion, but it's an important income stream. And it's one from a total plan standpoint we want to talk about. A lot of advisors don't necessarily cover that because they don't get paid on your Social Security decision. But to us, it's really an important conversation or decision to make as you consider all the different options. Do you reduce your expenses? Do you pay down debt sooner than what is required? So all of that's just part of general tax reduction strategies that are important to think about. How do you withdraw money in retirement? So you might have 3 sources of income: non-retirement accounts, which are taxable, IRA or 401k, 403b retirement accounts, that's called tax deferred, and then tax-free accounts, things like Roth IRA, life insurance, cash value would be considered tax-free. So if you've built up all those accounts, what's the best way to take money out? Well, the rule of thumb that you're going to read about, that the media is going to talk about, is you take out taxable first, then you move to tax deferred, then you move to tax-free. Very rarely does that give you the most amount of money, though, because you're considering that in a vacuum. You're not thinking about taxes. You're not thinking about the different tax tiers. And that's where we have tools that we can use that will really help spell out what is the best distribution strategy in terms of how much should I take out of tax deferred before I switch over to taxable, before I move to tax free. And over a span of 30 years, that can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because of the tax system and how things grow. And we have different tools that we can share to really quantify that for you. But again, all those things are important: the types of investments, risk tolerance, time horizon, income needs, just all part of an overall comprehensive plan. So how are we doing on time here? 4:54. Just a little case study here. You look at John and Jane Doe, not a real couple, 66 and 65, looking to retire right about now. Life expectancy pushed out to 95. Love their kids, Tim and Cindy. Want to leave them an estate, not necessarily quantify the amount, but want to leave something. And then they've got little grandchild Timmy, who they would want to provide some type of education funding for, something like that in the future for their distributions. Let's say their assets here, they built up about 1.2 million. So 101,000 of that is house equity. So that's really kind of illiquid unless you sell the house in the future or take a reverse mortgage. We won't get into too much about that right now, but they've got, I'm sorry, that's their debt in the house, 101,000. Their house value is 427. So they've got about 320,000 of equity. Got Roth IRAs, 401ks, non-retirement accounts. So a lot of different types of tax tiers in terms of their savings. Thinking about their income stream. John has 20,000 in Social Security. Jane has 14,000 in Social Security. John's got a pension of 20,000. So right there, they got $54,000 of an annuity. All of those are annuities, guaranteed income stream, can't own it. Then you've got expenses, mortgage payments, 20,000 a year, living expenses of $73,000 a year. Again, you got to factor in things like inflation. We know that those types of living expenses go up over time. Mortgage payments stay fixed if you've got a fixed rate mortgage, and the reason why we always like to consider it as a separate expense is it eventually won't be there. Eventually, when you're done paying your mortgage, it's like a new pension. Yeah, I was paying $2,000 a month for my mortgage. Now I don't have to pay that anymore. That's $2,000 extra in my pocket that I don't have to pay somebody. So liability expenses are an important thing to consider when they're going to drop off in retirement. And again, it's that whole theory that I was talking about before. Your expenses don't necessarily stay constant over time. They ebb and they flow and they change based on Social Security coming in, based on liability payments being paid off. Ultimately, looking at the way that you organize this, I mean, the first thing that we want to look at is we don't want to run out of money. We want to make sure that we have the right amount of investments and the right amount of income flows, like Social Security and pensions. And based on that budget, we want to see, okay, based on a conservative rate of return, what do things look like over a period of time? And then what type of money would you leave in an estate if things just come true like we're predicting? And again, we're making educated guesses here. We don't know what rate of return is going to be, so we want to assume a fairly conservative one. We don't know how long you're going to live, so we want to assume a long life expectancy because that's the risk. We don't know what types of investment shocks there will be. But that's why planning is an ongoing thing. We want to look at this every single year and remodel what things look like from an estate perspective. But then we look at, okay, if things look comfortable based on option one, then we start adding in things like, well, what if we want to put in $10,000 a year to Timmy's education? What if we want to add a $5,000 to $10,000 family vacation where they take their kids and their grandkids somewhere? As you start to add those things, then the picture changes. But in the end, we want to make sure that there's some blue here at the end, that they've got some portfolio assets. And we want to have a certain cushion at the end because we know that our educated guesses won't come true down to the penny. Like in this roadmap, we assume a fairly low rate of return, but investments don't have the exact same rate of return every year. So we do variations of that. It's called a probability analysis, where we look at 1,000 different ups and downs. How much money might you have left? We have what's called a guardrail approach, where, again, in planning, we're making educated guesses from a rate of return standpoint. But if we know that rate of return is much higher than we are guessing it might be, or assuming it might be, then we want to give you an idea of how much more you could withdraw if you want to. Because otherwise you're going to leave a huge estate at the end if you don't withdraw that extra money. Maybe you gift it away. It's just those ongoing conversations that we're constantly having, looking at these models, looking at how income flow changes as you add in different goals, as you add in different experiences. And that's really what we love doing, sitting down and seeing how does it affect your overall legacy that you might live? How does it affect your overall retirement if you take out a little bit more for XYZ goal? But ultimately, what should you do next? Gathering resources, knowing what is available, getting your Social Security statement, account statements, trying to figure out a budget. The budget's sometimes a tougher one. A lot of people don't keep that budget down to the penny. But if you look at your take-home pay, and that's what you're spending, we can use that as your budget. As long as you're not racking credit card debt, you're spending something. Everybody's spending something. Everybody has a budget, they just don't know it. Make a list of any questions or concerns that you might have, or a presentation like this might have brought up. Let us know if we can help. Make appointments with us. Always happy to meet and and help people get started in this journey, because it's an amazing one. And it's hard to jump into that journey. Everybody's always nervous to jump into that journey, but it does get easy over time, and we are always honored to be able to help you, help our clients with all the different facets of retirement planning, like you see on the screen. So with that, it is 5:01. I am going to stop recording here.